Mr. Elizondo is a former intelligence officer who spent his career working tirelessly in the shadows on sensitive national security matters, including investigating UAPs as the head of ATIP. He performed those duties admirably. Signed, Harry Reid. I do this because I want to, and the sacrifices I've made and my family's made because we believe in what we're doing. But make no mistake, I don't work for anybody out there who demands, who's self-entitled, say, I demand to know the truth. You can demand all you want. I'm not going to do anything illegal or that hurts national security simply because some armchair quarterback who's been sitting in his mother's basement in his underwear demands answers from me. Nothing's stopping you. Go join the army, go become an intelligence officer, go study UAPs, and go report to Congress and the executive branch and try to thread that needle with the American people yourself. There's nothing stopping people from doing that. Governments aren't always truthful with their people, with their citizens, and that's a problem because this democracy only works because we as citizens have faith and confidence in our institutions and those who are charged to represent us. And when governments do things that are not in the best interest of their citizens and then lie about it, then we have a significant problem on our hands. See up here, this patch, Brigade 2506, was the unit that the CIA put together to launch the invasion on the Bay of Pigs. That was my father's unit. In fact, I'll share something else with you I haven't shared publicly, but I asked my father a question. I wanted his advice. I said, Dad, what do you think is the greatest threat to humanity?
Chris Lehto, welcome to Lehto Files.
Okay, I'm here with a man that I think needs no introduction on my channel, at least, Lehto Files. Lue Elizondo, thank you so much for coming. I know you're a very busy man.
No, my honor and privilege. Look, always loved what you do. You got a great team, and it's really my honor and privilege to spend some time with you and your wonderful audience. So thank you. I certainly feel very privileged.
The honor is definitely all mine. I guess the one question I was just thinking about to start this is: are you recognized now? Can you walk through an airport and people will not come up to you? Does that happen?
Sometimes they'll come up to me and they'll want to shake my hand. Sometimes people will deliberately avoid me. I suspect because they don't want to be associated with that, that guy in the UFO world. Most of the public interaction I have is very, very positive, one-on-one. As you know, I have spent my entire life in the shadows. For somebody being in the intelligence community, anonymity was always my friend. And so coming out in kind of a little bit more of a public way has been has taken a lot of getting used to. There's a lot of adjustments that some have to make. And look, there's both good and bad. The best part is when someone comes up and they say, listen, my father loves hearing you talk, and they start sharing ideas about their own experiences, right? Like when I was a kid, my mom and I had a UFO experience. To me, it's very heartwarming. And I tell people all the time, look, if you see me, I'm just an average dude. Tap me on the shoulder, say, hey, Lou, what's up? Doesn't bother me a bit. But of course, there are, unfortunately, as you probably know, being somewhat in the public sphere yourself, there's consequences to it. It's a double-edged sword. It is the reason why I live where I live in the middle of a remote part of Wyoming. Our elevation is higher than our population. I have 5 German Shepherds. I do occasionally have security concerns, and I guess that's kind of the more dark side. Um, and most of those security concerns aren't from everyday people who appreciate what I'm doing or are curious. They tend to be from people who suffer from truly, I believe, some sort of mental affliction, and so it's not really their fault. I know it's easy for people to lay blame and say, well, there's a bunch of people out there that are haters and are not good people. I think even some of the haters are probably not bad people. And I think if there's people that, on both sides that require, some sort of mental help, we should always try to be as graceful as possible and as patient as possible and as understanding as possible, because there are people who do need help. Mental illness is a real thing. And in that case, we need to really show compassion. And so that's why, even with some of the threats I received, I try not to take it personally. I try to look at it as maybe there's people that have maybe some sort of trauma in their life. And so Yeah, I guess that's a long answer to a short question.
No, yeah, I can completely see that. When I was in fighter squadron, if we had any sort of media, even if it's just local media, come to the squadron and say, "Hey, do we want any pilots? Want to give an interview or something?" It was crickets. Nobody wanted to have their name out there. Nobody wanted their face. So I can just imagine, especially as in counterintelligence or covert operations. And now, you're one of the most recognizable people I think in the world, at least around UAPs.
Fortunately, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's a lot of people more recognizable, and I suspect if I probably shave this, I would be less recognizable. My wife insists that she said I have a face of a 12-year-old, so I've got to have facial hair. Otherwise, let's just say I don't get positive attention from my wife. So I sport the short beard, and I suspect that's probably the most recognizable piece about me.
But I think, yeah, you have mentioned threats against you. It's been controversial. I've been really surprised at a lot of the negative comments that you and other people have received. Like Jake Barber, he came out, a lot of, it seemed like a major negative reaction. So there's still a lot of debate in the UAP community. And I guess
Sure.
some people feel
But
this is,
this is nothing.
yeah.
This is nothing new, though. To be honest with you, I mean, every person that has come out initially, and even including people like Jacques Vallée, receive their fair share of hate. I like to think it's the vocal minority that express their negative views for whatever reason. I think the silent majority tend to be a little bit maybe more level-headed and less aggressive. But you're right, it's a problem, and we've all faced it. I think when you give a platform where everybody has a voice, well, the problem is anybody has a voice, and there's people out there that feel their voice should be heard over others, and it's a shame. But it's human behavior, isn't it? And we've seen this over and over and over again. We see it in politics. We even see it in religion. So I'm not really, especially in the UAP community, which I was warned very early on that it tends to eat itself. They were absolutely right. I never realized just really how vicious they can be against and towards one another. But I've also, like I said, met some fantastic people. I have some people, believe it or not, I met online that wound up becoming really close and good friends. So it's a double-edged sword. But if I had to choose and say, well, in order to preserve my security and my anonymity, I'm going to get off social media. If the cost of doing that is that then I can no longer interact with people who are, good people and friends, then I'm willing to take the hits. It's okay. It's worth it because I think overall we're making collectively, folks like you, me, your audience, we all have a part in this disclosure movement, and I think all voices matter, even the ones that are hateful sometimes, and I disagree with what they're doing, and more importantly, how they're doing it. Their voice counts too. And so we have to remember that, especially in a democracy, which you and I have both defended at times, even violently. It's part of our society, whether we like it or not. And I think it's worth preserving.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like our society had gotten, I don't want to say overly woke, but it seems like everything can be an insult at these points. And so I'm just my own personal viewpoint is I'm trying to, like you said, even take the negative comments with a grain of salt. Again, it's just a comment, it's just a thought, and it can just be referenced and then moved on.
It's hard. There's a lot of maliciousness out there, especially for people who've never served their country before. And I understand that because maybe this is a topic that scares them. Maybe they've been personally involved in some way or shape or form. Or, in some cases, as I've seen, people have made a cottage industry for themselves for many, many years, if not decades. And now, someone comes in from the government, which, by the way, I find very funny and ironic because of this entire time, you followed you wanted was somebody from the inside to come out and tell the truth. And now that they have that, no misinformation, no,
Yeah.
you're out there trying to fool us. But I think again, it's part of our democracy, and we have to embrace it, whether we like some of the comments or not. And we have to be able to recognize when there are some voices out there that, frankly, truly need help. Um, this is the way life is now. Whether you are, again, a public figure in the media, a public figure in politics, even a public figure in religion, believe it or not, We see a lot of that. So, anyways, for what it's worth it to me to engage. There's a lot of things happening this year, a lot of exciting things happening. Been to DC quite a bit, a lot of things going on overseas. So, you know, there's a lot to be to be thankful about.
I saw recently, and I thought it was settled, but I've seen posts on X that are still questioning your role in ATIP. Do you know where this is coming from, or can you clarify once and for all? What was your role?
I mean, look,
What are your
I've
motives?
got documentation after documentation. I can pull some of it up right now on my
No,
phone and
I know.
show folks. Um, a lot of it is coming from, I think, those what I said before, people who have specific agendas. They like creating consternation. And here, let's pull this up here. Okay, so here we go. Everybody knows who Harry Reid is. Harry Reid was the original sponsor for OSAP and ATIP. He was also the Senate Majority Leader, and he was the, if you will, the owner of ATIP. This is a letter from him, signed by him, dated April 26, 2021. With his letterhead and his signature, to whom it may concern, as United States Senate Majority Leader, I worked with Republican Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska and Democratic Senator Dan Inouye of Hawaii to secure $22 million of funding for what would become known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, an unclassified but unpublicized investigatory effort dedicated to studying unidentified aerial phenomena. As one of the original sponsors of ATIP, I can state as a matter of record Luis Elizondo's involvement and leadership role in this program. Mr. Elizondo is a former intelligence officer who spent his career working tirelessly in the shadows on sensitive national security matters, including investigating UAPs as the head of ATIP. He performed those duties admirably. Signed, Harry Reid. So that's just, one of the many examples I have of documentation, copious amounts of documentation establishing who I am. I've got other letters and memorandums, which I will not share right now publicly, but if I ever need to, I certainly will. And copious amounts of emails and other documentation from the Department of Defense itself, establishing for the record my role in ATIP. At this point, I think if people want to argue that, then, want to waste your time, be my guest, but we've kind of moved on from that argument. There's people who even question at one point my military service and question whether or not I worked in intelligence or if I worked at USDI or any of these other places I worked at. If I spend my time, you know, fighting off these ankle biters, that is going to distract me from the bigger job that I have, and that is fighting for transparency and disclosure for the American people, and trying to ultimately get the government to do what it is supposed to do. And that disclosure shouldn't be coming from me. It should be coming from our government. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is work very hard to help our government um, figure out a way to have this conversation with the American people, a conversation that I think we're long overdue, a conversation that I think we deserve, a conversation that had been paid for, the results of which had been paid for by taxpayer money. And so I think the time has come for elements, not the whole government. I'm not blaming the whole government here, but elements of our government to finally come clean about what it knows within reason about this incredible enigma we've been dealing with called UAP for decades.
Yeah, that seems like some of the frustration, right? As many listeners ask, why haven't we seen the craft or the bodies? It seems like Lue Elizondo, you are required to present these bodies of this craft or the hard evidence. They'll say, why doesn't Lue present the hard evidence? But I guess, what can you say to those people who are frustrated by having to wait
Well,
for the government? Yeah,
if they have a security clearance and a need to know and can come into a skip with me, then they'll see it.
amazing.
I'll also remind certain people that I don't work for you. Sorry, you don't pay my bills, you don't pay my mortgage. I owe you nothing. I do this because I want to, and the sacrifices I've made and my family's made because we believe in what we're doing. But make no mistake, I don't work for anybody out there who demands, who's self-entitled, say, I demand to know the truth. You can demand all you want. My job is very simple. My job is not to come out and necessarily reveal everything to the American people. My job is very simple, and that is to help our government be truthful and more transparent with the American people. It's not my job to provide that information to you. It's your government's job. And I'm not going to go ahead and go out of bounds and talk about things that can get me in trouble. I still maintain my security clearance, and that means something to me. And I know for a lot of people who never had a security clearance or never served their country, that doesn't mean anything, and I can't help that. But to those of us who have served, it does mean something. In fact, a lot of us put our lives on the line because of what we believe in, our ideals and our values. And that's one of my core values is to make sure that I don't color outside the line. I'm willing to go right up to that line, no problem. But I'm not going to cross it. I'm not going to do anything illegal or that hurts national security simply because some armchair quarterback who's been sitting in his mother's basement in his underwear demands answers from me. You know, if you think you can do a better job, then get your butt out of the chair and go get a job and put some clothes on and do it yourself. Nothing's stopping you. Go join the army, go become an intelligence officer, go study UAPs and go report to Congress and the executive branch and try to thread that needle with the American people yourself. There's nothing stopping people from doing that. They're more than welcome to do it. If they think they can do a better job than me, then be my guest. I'm not stopping anybody from doing that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you mentioned earlier how people don't trust like people such as yourself. I see, debate against your credibility, et cetera, because you come from the government. And yet it seems that the government is where all this information is kept, or at least the vast bulk of the information is kept.
Right. Right. And it just so happened, look, I didn't ask for the job in ATIP. I was brought in and recruited into it. And I decided to come out and be forthcoming about what we found. That alone, I could have walked after 2017 and just after the New York Times article and just walked away, throw my hands up and say mission success. Now it's over to you folks. But I didn't do that. And I continued to do what I was doing and trying to push for advocacy, even at my own expense. This has not been an endeavor that's been necessarily profitable for me. I made it very clear. I lived for years in a trailer with my wife. My wife had to work at Target and at Home Depot just to help to pay the bills. And we're in executive level equivalents working for the state of Maryland. My wife and myself working for the U.S. government. Um, Fortunately, things are a little better for us now, but by no means, am I living in a rock star mansion and driving, Mercedes and Porsches and things like that. I drive a pickup truck. I live a very normal life. I still have bills I have to pay. I'm not financially independent. So when I'm not doing disclosure, I'm still having to earn a living, and I have to find ways to do that in a way that is symbiotic with what I'm trying to achieve, which is greater transparency. And that's not always easy. There's a reason why they use the term starving artist, because it might be a passion to be an artist, but chances are you're not going to make a lot of money unless you're very, very, very lucky and very successful. And I'm neither. I'm neither lucky nor successful. So that leaves hard work, and I got to figure out ways to continue to feed my family, and my wife does too. And we are very ordinary people. I think people in social media, for some reason, feel very emboldened when they're behind a keyboard and they're pretty sure they're anonymous. They're very quick to attack others. Um, in the words of Mike Tyson, it's pretty amazing what people are willing to say when they're pretty sure they're not going to get punched in the mouth. Um, and by the way, I'm not espousing any type of violence, but it's true. People think when there's no consequences, then they're free to defame and lie about people and say whatever they want. And there's a difference, by the way. I'm all for free speech. It's one of our sacred constitutional rights is free speech. Free speech doesn't include slander. It doesn't include defamation and lies and false accusations, which is exactly what we're seeing. Then furthermore, you have some quote unquote journalists out there who, in my opinion, are not journalists. Trash tabloid type, you know, bottom feeders that are into sensationalism, and they will twist and say things and do things um, and manipulate things in a way that are inconsistent with what true journalists do. I've had videos that interviews taken of me where people have literally edited them to make it say like I'm saying something else. And only when the full video comes out do people realize that it's being manipulated, right? But there's no consequences for those people. Why? Because we live in a society where free speech is protected, which I agree with. Um, but there's no consequences. And people say, well, why don't you sue them? Well, because it costs $100,000 each time. And most of these people don't have $100,000 to even collect. So, I would be chasing my tail and spending millions going out and trying to defend myself from defamation and suing these people. So I have to be very careful and figure out, okay, if I eventually sue somebody, I got to figure out, who's really worth it and who can I make a statement with and who will people look at and say, wow, that was a hell of a lesson that was taught. So that's kind of the way the calculus works. There are some people on my radar, I will say that I'm watching very closely. And if they step over the line too many times, they're going to find out. They're going to find out what happens when they do that.
I think there's like a weird phenomenon like like road rage. You'll see like the nicest people. All of us have probably dealt with it. Is you get in a car and when you're driving, something else happens. You're not like a normal regular person anymore. You're a person in a car, and
Hey,
so
and I'm
you
guilty
like
of
come
that
something
myself.
else, and people go
I,
nuts over simple slights, etc.
Absolutely, I'm guilty of that myself. Someone is driving like driving let's just say inconsiderate, and they're doing it deliberately. I get infuriated.
Yeah,
That's one of my hot buttons. In fact, my wife will often refuse to drive in a car with me sometimes simply because when I get into a major metropolitan area and I see people driving that way, it infuriates me. People, for example, dump things, right? Like blocking the box. A lot of people do it, but the question is why? You're doing something that's going to inconvenience 100 people that are trying to get across, but for some reason you're more important, right?
yeah,
Or people who get in the left lane. This is another thing that one proposal, if I ever went back to the government and had a chance to make a recommendation, I would tell people, look, the left lane is for passing only. And if you camp out in the left lane, you're going to get a huge ticket. People often say, well, I'm doing 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, so I'm going fast enough. Well, don't look now, but you're being hypocritical. 1 mile an hour over the speed limit is breaking the law. So you don't set the moral speed limit, right? You don't set the moral guidelines of how much faster everybody's allowed to break the law, and you're going to break it, and
yeah,
everybody's going to only be able to break it as much as you, right? Look, bottom line is get your butt over and let people that are passing pass. Um,
yeah.
but
But
yeah,
they can
see,
just
now
say,
it's a hot button for me,
yeah.
right? You can see I start
That's
getting
what I'm
like
saying.
flustered
I
even
think
thinking
that's what
about it.
happens. People see something, right? Because what if they're going faster than the speed limit, at all? Then they shouldn't be passed. Someone gets mad and then there's, like you said, there's minimal consequences. And all of a sudden they just start typing, who knows what in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But
So that's why it's important. I admit I have I have my fair degree of road rage myself, or maybe I
everybody,
would call it infuriation, right?
yeah,
So I get it. I get it. And there's hot button topics, and especially in the topic of UFOs. There's a lot of people that have been investing many years of their life and a lot of emotion into this. And when information comes out that doesn't necessarily comport with their pre-existing narrative,
hmm,
then they react, and sometimes they react poorly.
they're going too fast in the left lane, faster than I
Yeah.
wanted. But let's,
Or I'm going too slow,
oh, we're
right?
going too slow. Th- So you mentioned there, and I that was one of the big things I got out of reading Imminent, your book, Amazing Success, I believe, bestseller from last August. I recommend everyone watching to read it. It's amazing, or listen to it on audiobook. That's what I learned in that is really the hardships that you went through to do the job that you're doing now, right? When you really just left, you sent in your resignation letter. That must have been extremely difficult. Telling your wife, going through all that discussion as you relay in the book, and then going out on a limb, really, putting your pension essentially aside and
Oh yeah.
going to the Stars Academy, and that amazing risk. Do you think it's paid off? Would you do that again if you had to give everything up like that to go down this route?
Well, hindsight is always 2020. Would I make the sacrifices again? Absolutely. But now knowing what I know, would I do it a different way? Potentially. I'm sure in certain circumstances, there's decisions I would have made. Forgive me. There's decisions I would have made a little bit differently. But we have no way of knowing until we've done it already once before, and that's why I think as equally important as success is, failure is very important. Failure is a wonderful, wonderful teaching tool. And oftentimes, when I would recruit somebody into the Pentagon or into the intelligence community, my questions weren't always, how many successes have you had? A lot of them have been, how many failures have you had? And usually the more failures, the better, because that means they've risked and they have, under trial and error, done things, and I've learned a good lesson from that. And so I'm okay with that. I think, the key to failure is not giving up. Everybody fails. If you don't fail, you don't try. You're not trying. So failure is equally important, if not in some cases even more important than success. So those are very valuable lessons.
I think your book Imminent was definitely a success. It's a bestseller. There's so many key points in there. One of the main
Well,
points,
you know why
yeah,
it's a bestseller, right? I can't take credit for it. You guys, you made it a bestseller, not me. I just wrote my life as it happened, and it became a bestseller because it shows that people were interested in this topic, not necessarily interested in me, but interested in this topic, and they want to know more. And so the reason why this book became the #1 New York Times bestseller and London Times bestseller and Sunday Times, again, it's not because of me. It's because of you, because of your audience, because of readers that are tired of being lied to by certain elements within our authority apparatus, within our government.
I was impressed by ATIP. You guys went and actually investigated the Nimitz. And that's really the story that turned me around when I saw Fravor's interviews on several podcasts, Rogan, etc. And since I was a fighter pilot, I just instantly related to him. He seemed like one of the many amazing commanders I had, one of the leaders. It was him.
He
I
is.
didn't know him, but that's exactly what it felt like.
Him and Alex and Chad, I mean, they are of rare cloth. These folks are no nonsense. They're not conspiracy theorists. They didn't believe in UFOs, but they decided to be courageous and tell their truth to the American people. And by the way, there are hundreds of those pilots. Look at Ryan Graves and what he's been able to achieve as well for this topic, with his Americans for for Safe Aerospace. Look at Admiral Gallaudet, who's now focusing on the topic of USOs. Look at Mike Gold at NASA, right? A lot of people that are willing to come out now, and put their credibility and even their careers on the line. Look at you, right? You could be covering anything you want out there. With your successful background and as a fighter pilot and all the other stuff you've done, you don't have to cover this topic, but you are, and you're doing it because you feel it's the right thing to do. So I agree with you. I think, Nimitz was the first one. It was one of the gold standard investigations conducted by one of my colleagues. I think they did a very good job. I had a copy of the actual investigation. But then there's a lot of other stuff too from other pilots that we're seeing and other intelligence collectors. And by the way, some of the videos are extremely compelling. I mean, like, they're not grainy, blurry things on a FLIR pod. They are right there up close and personal.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear because Arrow comes out and releases their most debunked videos. Essentially, the only ones we've seen are ones that they can definitively prove are not UAPs, and the ones that the big questions I have, are like Bob Salas, where you have the nuclear incidents, the Nimitz, and the Gimbal. Those three really we just hear dead silence from the
Yeah.
government. From Arrow.
Well, and let's face it, I mean, Arrow has kind of done a 180 in the last year under its new leadership. Whereas the last leadership was like, oh, nothing to see here, folks. These always have prosaic explanations if you don't know what, even though we don't know what they are. The new guy says, look, with my background of physics, which by the way is a lot, there's things that we are seeing that defy my current understanding and our understanding of state-of-the-art technology in physics. We can't explain it, right? So there are things out there that, in essence, go bump in the night that we don't know what they are. They're not balloons, they're not helicopters, they're not drones, they're not planes, they're not missiles, and they're performing in ways that defy our current understanding of aerospace and those types of physics. And so I think if people pay attention and read between the lines, they'll see that, I think there's Arrow is actually might be turning a corner a little bit. And I want to give them a fair chance. They do seem to be trying to do the right thing now. And as a result, I want to make sure, I try not to beat them up too bad because their heart seems to be in the right place.
Yeah, I interviewed James Fox, and he said the current director told him he couldn't part his own hair without getting approval from the Pentagon. I don't know if you
Yeah,
heard that.
yeah. I heard something very similar. And, that's very common to the Pentagon bureaucracy. That's why I had to leave. That's why I had to resign, was because of that, because it wasn't allowing us to do the thing that the American taxpayer were paying us to do and Congress expected us to do. Um, they weren't allowing us to report, and they weren't allowing us to make, they didn't want to make any decisions. They wanted those decisions to be made at our level. And that was completely inappropriate. They needed to be made at a much more senior level. And so, again, one of the motivations for me to have to resign my position.
Are there any stories in imminent or insights that you feel were underappreciated by the public or media?
You know what? I don't really know. And I never really paid attention to the reviews. My focus is really on these one-on-one interactions, like with yourself. If there's a question you or somebody, your listeners have a question, I'll address them directly. As for the back and forth online and about my book, unless somebody asks me the question directly, I usually don't address it because I just simply don't have the bandwidth. I'd be spending all my time each day answering questions out of that particular book. I did think it was very important that I look. It was very hypocritical. I decided early on I was going to be very forthcoming in that book, a lot about my own personal self as well. And even though I know it would expose me to additional scrutiny, which it did, I felt a need to do it. Why? Because I can't very well. It's very hypocritical of me. I can't very well expect transparency from our own government if I'm not willing to be transparent myself in my own book. So that's why you see a lot of anecdotes and experiences there that might not necessarily be related to UAP specifically, but I think it was important to put it in there so people know, a little bit who Lue Elizondo is. Who am I? And at the end of the day, I'm just an ordinary dude like you and everybody else. I tell people, if you wanted to capture me in a subtitle of anything, probably the most accurate portrayal of me would be an unexceptional man living through exceptional times. That's how I would characterize myself. I'm not doing anything that anybody else wouldn't do if they were in my position. If you took the same secrecy oath as I did, you would protect that information. But if you also took the same oath to protect our country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, then you got to figure out a way to do that, because sometimes the two are inconsistent. Because sometimes the enemy is the bureaucracy itself, right? The same
Mm.
bureaucracy that tells us what to do and how to do it. So, how do you continue to do a job where you are looking out for the best interests of the American people, but at the same time, not doing anything that's inconsistent with your other oath, which is to, follow the rules of the chain of command? The two aren't always consistent, believe it or not. And, there's an old saying, sometimes to be patriotic, you have to do things that don't seem very patriotic at the time.
Yeah, as an officer in the Air Force, all of our oaths were sworn to the Constitution, actually. So none of it was sworn to the bureaucracy, like you mentioned. We have these all these agencies, NSA, CIA. They've been caught kind of red-handed, I think, doing some really undemocratic things, if you will. For instance, the JFK files, the hearing just came out. It was 2 weeks ago, and I was interested to hear that again. The CIA had three top officials that had lied, and looking into the whole JFK case goes to Cuba. And I was very interested to hear in your Sean Ryan interview about your father, who actually spent 2 years in a Cuban prison. That
Yeah,
is
in
just
fact,
amazing.
see up here, this patch, Brigade 2506, was the unit that the CIA put together to launch the invasion on the Bay of Pigs. That was my father's unit. In fact, I'll share something else with you I haven't shared publicly, but when my father was exiled, uh, Castro had declared everybody traitors who participated in the Bay of Pigs and called them worms. So as kind of the rally call here, you see this. This is a little worm here saying, uh, let's go, let's rock and roll, let's go back and do what we need to do. Um, yeah, governments aren't always truthful with their people, with their citizens, and that's a problem because This democracy only works because we as citizens have faith and confidence in our institutions and those who are charged to represent us. And when governments do things that are not in the best interest of their citizens and then lie about it, then we have a significant problem on our hands. My father passed away. In my book, I talk about my mother passing away some years ago from cancer, but my father passed away 2 years ago on Father's Day, and my father had very significant influence in my life. He was unabashedly patriotic towards his country, although sometimes very critical of it. Because I asked him on a road trip. I knew it was about 2 months before he passed, and I knew it was going to be. He never told me he had what he had, but I could tell by his physique he didn't have long, and he just didn't want to tell me that. So was fortunate enough to have a 3-day road trip from here in Wyoming to drive down to South Florida with him, and I knew it'd probably be my last time to really spend time with him. And about halfway through the drive, maybe somewhere by Kansas or something, I asked my father a question, and looking back, I feel a little guilty about it because I said it almost flippantly. I wanted his advice. I said, "Dad, what do you think is the greatest threat to humanity?" Now, in my mind, I'm thinking maybe it's some sort of national pandemic, right, or biological or virus that's been released to the population. Maybe it's terrorism. And my father thought for a moment, and he looked to me and he said, he used to call me Chino as a kid. That's my nickname, Chino, or he used to call me Pancho as well. And he said, Chino, it's the greatest threat to humanity is corruption. Forgive me, I'm kind of now reliving this a little bit. He said it's corruption. And so I thought to myself when I said, Dad, you mean like financial corruption, like religious corruption? And he said, No, son, any form of corruption. Corruption is the act of giving away, trading away, selling off one of your core values in exchange for something else, whether it be monetary or it be something else. And so when you have that in a government, when you have corruption in a government, then it begins to very quickly chip away, erode the very foundation of democracy. And when that happens, it's a very quick and very slippery slope into utter tyranny. And so my father happened to know a little bit about that and what that looks like because he lived through it. And I never forgot that. And it turned out that when you have corruption, again, in our own government, not necessarily monetarily, but someone is doing something um, for purposes that go against the ethos of our nation, then that's a problem. People are making decisions and doing things that they don't have the authority to do, not legally and certainly not ethically. And those are the enemies of the state. Those people, when you learn that there was a plan by the CIA, there was a time I worked a little bit with that organization. Um, when you find out that there was a plan to literally blow up a U.S. Navy vessel in Havana Harbor and then use that as a predicate to blame the Cuban people and use that as a purpose for invading Cuba, when you yourself are the ones who put the bomb and killed people, Americans, to do that. That's not democracy. That is not democracy. I don't know what it is, but it's certainly not democracy. And we have a history of doing that. You can look at things like the MK Ultra experiments, where the CIA had distributed LSD to unsuspecting people, and some of them wound up dead. Look at the Tuskegee experiments, where we allowed human beings, fellow Americans, to go through the full process of syphilis, a disease that ravages you over a long period of time, and we allowed fellow Americans to die from a disease that we already had a cure for, right? So so we've got problems, and the purpose is to make sure that we never repeat those same mistakes. We have to have watchdogs. We have to have people that are vigilant, making sure that these things don't happen again. And when they do happen, we hold people accountable for them. Um, and so, anyways, long way to kind of talk about the enemy of bureaucracy and people like you and me swearing an allegiance and an oath to our nation. But that's an oath that's taken very seriously. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't know about you, but I was never relieved of that oath when I left government. Were you?
No, no, you're not.
Yeah, right. And so I guess the point is that we're still obliged and we're held accountable to that oath. And I'm okay with that. I believe in that oath. I think every American should feel that way personally. Um, but I guess not everybody does.
Yeah, I guess my personal viewpoint is more of a disappointment. It's like the disappointed parent or something, where I just know the country can and should do better, and I hope we see that in the future. But that reminds me of a question. Ali and Justin, they run our UAP Society news show. It's our sister channel, and they actually met you. You made a great impression on them, and they wanted me to ask, actually, is what is your greatest hope for the future of humanity? Since we're talking about that.
Wow. For all of humanity? Well,
Yeah.
that's a much bigger question then that's beyond UAP, clearly. Um, I think the greatest hope of humanity, I think 95% of our issues as a species comes from our inherent propensity to move towards violence when we don't get our way, when we don't understand something, when we are afraid of something. Um, if we could learn to be a kinder species, I often tell people, you say, well, what do I need to know if came across an NHI, how would I relate and interact? And I always tell people the same thing. Look, I think before you try to understand what is out there and what is definitively not human, you first need to understand what's in here and what makes us human, and where are those limitations. Um, I would love to see humanity for once at peace. I would love to see humanity not be violent. I would love to see humanity respect one another in a way, whether it's religious acceptance, political acceptance, lifestyle acceptance. Um, Live and let live. Do no harm to anyone else. And I know that sounds weird from a guy like this that's got a background full of patches and military stuff, right? Um, but I've been part of an apparatus that really focused in tearing human beings apart, and I'd like to spend the rest of my life perhaps help putting them back together. Um, let's make no qualms about it. When you're in national security, when you're in the Department of Defense, which is to some degree a little different than the intelligence community, but your job is very simple. You're not peacekeepers. You're not there. You're not the State Department. You were there to fight and win wars, and ultimately that means killing more of the enemy than they kill of yourselves. And that's what warfare is, and it should always be a last result. Um, Nobody wins in warfare. There's just some that lose more than others. Um, War is a terrible thing, and violence, and whether it's a war on the battlefield or it's a war in your household where spouses aren't getting along and people are saying ugly things to each other because there's consequences. Because there's in one instance, when you're talking a warfare and on a geopolitical scale, you have citizens that are hurting. But when you have warfare in a household, you have children that are hurting. You have children that see this behavior and then think that this is normal and this is a way that relationships work, and it's not. It's very dysfunctional, and we're not doing a good job policing ourselves. We're just not. We rely on everybody else to do our own work. We are a very entitled society. We forget what it is to suffer and struggle and sacrifice, and we want everybody else to pay the bill but us. We are used to, creating laws that apply to everybody else but myself. I'm a special category. That doesn't apply to me. And when you do that, you start going down a very slippery slope. Again, as I said, you know, law should be inclusive, not exclusive. I disagree with exclusive lawmaking, where laws apply to one group of people but not another. I think all laws apply to all people fairly and equally. Um, and I think we're going down a wrong path when we think we can carve out exceptions for different people. Um, I'm Hispanic, certainly on my father's side. I don't expect any special privilege. When I first went to the University of Miami, they wanted me to fill out an application for a scholarship, where I could get financial scholarship simply because of the fact that I was Cuban, and I refused to. I thought it was terrible. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but Cubans in Miami are not a minority. I think there's more of us living in Miami than there are in Cuba. But secondly, I don't think it's fair that simply because I was born one way or the other, that now I should have special privilege. It's also another reason why I decided when I went into the Army, I went enlisted. I could have gone in as an officer because of my medical training and my background. But my father taught me at a very young age. He said, "Son, in order to be a good leader, you first need to know what it is to follow, and you need to be a good follower." And so, one of the reasons why I decided to go enlisted, um, I have no regrets about it. I had a colleague not too long ago, I won't say who, said, "Oh, Lou, you're thinking about this topic. You need to think like an officer. You're thinking like an enlisted." And I told him, I said, "Thank you. That's one of the greatest compliments you could ever have paid me, telling me I think like an enlisted person." Um, that doesn't bother me. I've worn the rank of officer on the civilian side, very senior, for a long time. But that's not what made me who I am. What made me who I am was when I was enlisted, being called up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go out in the middle of the snow and start up a Humvee and get the AM and the Singar's radio going. Meanwhile, I look inside the hooch and all the NCOs and officers are sitting there drinking coffee, watching us work. Um, I realize that is not the way leaders do things. You want to be a leader, you better be the first one out there. There's a saying, the original, and I love this saying, so I'll share it. The original founder of Suffrages department store in London, and by the way, this was remarkable for its time because there was never anything like that in London before. This was like a superstore of where you could get everything, hardware and fashion and everything. So Suffrages, he said, one of his understandings of leadership, right, where a manager will often tell people, "Go and do it." A leader says, "Let's go and do it." And I'll add on one more to that. In my opinion, a great leader says, "I'll be the first one to go." Um, I think that's kind of the way I like to look at things in my understanding of leadership. A lot of people claim to be leaders. Um, True leaders never claim to be leaders. They're recognized as leaders by their peers, by their supervisors, and by their subordinates. A true leader never has to say they're a leader. A true leader never uses the word me, mine, or I. This is my office. This is my staff. That's not a leader. A leader will say us, we, and ours. Um, a real leader will accept all responsibility when things go bad and not blame anybody but themselves. And a real leader will give credit when things happen that are good, even if give credit to people that even if those people didn't do all the work, you still give credit. And I think that's important. We forgot what real leadership is about. Being in the Air Force, you've seen leadership, and you've also seen, I'm sure, bad examples of leadership, right?
It
And
seems
both are equally
polar. Yeah.
important.
The generals,
Right.
especially, there's like one general will just be amazing, one of the, incredible leader. And then the next one will just be horrible. It's amazing.
You're right. Yeah, no, you're right. And but remember what I said in the very beginning of this discussion with you, that sometimes failure is one of the best ways to learn a lesson. And so if you see a bad leader, learn from that, right? Don't be like that person. If they are a bad leader, understand what are the aspects that make them bad or poor performance, and learn from that, right? And then it becomes a positive experience. Yeah, you had to deal with a bad leader, but guess what? You learned a good lesson, hopefully, on how not to be.
So, so look, getting back to your book and UAPs, that was an amazing discussion. Thank you, Lou. As far as the book, I was really impressed, and you've mentioned before about remote viewing, and it seems like a very controversial topic. As soon as you start getting into any discussions of consciousness or something that's not a nuts and bolts, you can. It's called the woo for a lot of reasons. We even had I watched a full interview with Joe McMoneagle, and he's been an amazing remote viewer. He was talking about
Mhm.
describing ancient structures on Mars and connections to Earth's pyramids. And he was actually hired by the CIA. I couldn't believe it because once you start looking into this stuff, you see that actually the CIA did
He was hi
hire him.
he
Yeah.
was hired by the CIA. We had remote viewers doing that, and in fact, there's some very interesting things where we were doing, there was some remote viewers looking at a Russian submarine, through remote viewing and remote viewed a UFO tracking it, like basically shadowing a Russian submarine. There's been a long interest by our intelligence apparatus in the topic of UAP and have been for a very, very long time. And that's one of, I think, the biggest revelations over the last couple of years is that, this is not new. We've been dealing with this for a very long time, and we have been dealing with things that seem quote unquote paranormal at the time, but have been substantiated to yield real results. And I'll tell you, share a story with you that I've been recently sharing about do we change our paradigm, because we are a species that suffers from the consequences of hubris all the time. And if there's one thing we've learned, a lesson here is that most of the time we're wrong. The first time we look at a topic, we're usually wrong about it. And so when, as most anthropologists will agree, as an example, modern human beings, Homo sapiens sapien, has been around roughly between the last 200 and 400,000 years. And so if you take a 24-hour clock, it was really only in the last maybe 10 minutes or so of our existence, towards a stroke of midnight, about 2,000 years ago, we realized there's two fundamental life forms on this planet, and it was the Greeks that basically suggested you are either A, a plant, or you are B, an animal. And it wasn't until maybe the last 15 seconds, 10 seconds of our existence during the Renaissance, roughly 350 years ago, that we realized there was this other form of life that's been on this planet all along that is neither plant nor animal. And it was the world of fungus. And so we all, as I've said before, we kind of tap ourselves on the shoulder and say, what clever little monkeys we are. And yet, it was the last second and a half of our existence. Think about this. In the last 120 years, that we actually discovered the true alpha, the true dominant life form on this planet that's been here all along. And in fact, if you take all the biomass of every plant and all the biomass of every animal and all the biomass of every fungus and add it all up together, it still doesn't add up to the biomass of this hidden life form that's been here all along. And it wasn't until we had the technology to curve glass and put it in a little metal tube and famously shout the words, little beasties, did we discover the world of microorganisms. And in fact, a form of life that is so pervasive, it is inside every human being. It comprises of who we are and what we are. It survives in areas that we thought were completely inhospitable to life, areas such as like the skin of the ISS space station, where the radiation is incredibly high. It survives miles beneath the crushing depth of the Arctic ice. It is everywhere. And so we're always learning something new. We're always having to redefine our paradigm and our existence, what it means to be human. So is it really that far-fetched? Could it be that these UAP are actually just as normal to Earth as we are? Maybe we're just at a point where technologically we can begin to interact with them. Maybe they've been from under the oceans this entire time, and we're just now beginning to realize what these things are. Maybe they are from outer space, but this is why I've always said that, we have to keep all options on the table until they're no longer on the table. Maybe they're from outer space, inner space, or the space in between. Maybe they're hyperdimensional. We are now realizing through certain models of quantum mechanics that it's quite possible that there are other realities, other dimensions that exist. And so when we go back to, looking at the CIA and its use of remote viewing and some of these other capabilities, um, it's really not that far-fetched. We have seen the Russians when they were developing in the 60s, 70s, what they call their psychotronic weapons development programs, where they were trying to enhance remote viewing capabilities and even delve into the idea of telekinesis. These were funded programs by other foreign governments that were real programs that arguably may have yielded some results. So, yeah, sometimes the truth can be stranger than fiction.
It makes me think of 2 points. The first is it was Antoine von Leeuwenhoek in 1683, really, that I think said these are the micro animals. Actually, it was Robert Hooke before that, but he hadn't confirmed them as animals. So if you think about it, 1683, doctors didn't start washing their hands till 200 years later, till the
That's right.
late 1800s. So they could see the little animals. They could see the microscopic life in the 1680s, but it took
Look at
humanity.
tuberculosis.
Yeah,
We didn't. People were being. We thought up until this last century that tuberculosis was something that people got genetically, right? And didn't realize that it's actually an airborne via aerosol, microorganism.
there was, and that brings me to another amazing thought. A statement you've said that really stuck in my mind is you had the sailors of old, when they go out and they'd see some sea beast and didn't know what it was. And I actually last week I was lucky enough. We went to spring break. We went to the Azores, and we went out on a boat. And I never
Beautiful,
thought
by
it
the
would
way.
happen.
Azores is gorgeous. You lucky guy.
It's amazing. Yeah, from I live in Portugal, so it's an easy, cheap flight out there. But was lucky enough to see a blue whale. Actually, there was two next to each other, and that's why we went. I really wanted to see it, show my family, if we had the chance. And I swear it looked exactly like a purple sea serpent. Because they come up quickly, they're not there long, and it's just this
Right.
giant purple largest animal that's ever lived on Earth, and it looks like a sea serpent, and it's gone. So I could completely. I just when I saw that, it was an amazing experience, and I thought of that statement you've made, where in the past sailors thought it was sea serpents, and then they learn, hey, this is just a part of life, a part of Earth life.
That's right. Our new exam. I mean, if you're an average scuba diver like I am, I mean, if you want to see an alien, go look at an octopus. I mean, wow. Talk about a life form that doesn't fit really any mold. Yeah, a lot of it is our interpretation of things, and again, it's our ignorance that leads us down these false trails and these false conclusions. But at the end of the day, it's really just part of our new understanding, our new paradigm, right? Our new reality, and it's not really sea monsters; it's just nature, and we can understand them and study them now, whereas before we could just sit back and marvel and speculate.
Final question, Lou. And back in 2022, I believe you said kind of a famous line. Come back in 5 years, which would bring us to 2027. I know you're going into the skiff with Christopher Mellon and David Grush, if he can get his security clearance.
Has that come out already?
Yeah, I saw. I don't know.
Man,
Can't hide anything.
okay. Boy, that was
Well, at
fast.
least I thought it was public knowledge. No one
Yeah, I
told
mean,
me in secret.
but
Yeah.
obviously it is. So, but yes, you're right. Please continue. I'm sorry. I digress.
So, so I guess can you give us any insight into what you think will happen? Will we get some sort of amazing, d- you know, path towards disclosure this year or next year? Do you think 2027 is the year?
Well, it every year is the year. There's things happening every year, and depending on what you're expecting, some people they're never going to get what they want. Other people have already gotten the confirmation that they were looking for. I've said before that disclosure is a process. It's a lengthy process. Takes a lot of real hard work to it. And it's not just showboating and telling everybody that you're doing something behind the scenes and whatnot. If you notice, I tend to be rather quiet about what we do on the Hill and what we do in with the administration and those officials, because it's really about results. It's not about taking credit for things. There's a lot of people out there in this UFO community that love to take credit, and most of them take credit for things they're not even responsible for. They take credit for stuff that we're doing. But I I think it's important that that these conversations happen that we're having on Capitol Hill because ultimately it's not my job to tell the American people the truth. It's the government's job to to tell the American people the truth. And so this is why I do what I do. I'm trying to help that process in a way where people don't have to hear it from me. They can hear it from Congress. They can hear it from other whistleblowers. They can hear it from administration officials, right? Think about when Radcliffe came out and said that, yeah, these UAP are real. There's something to it, right? This is the director of national intelligence, who's now, by the way, the director of the CIA. Um, you have a lot of people like that in administrations making statements like that. 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. Nobody would have. They said, "Man, if I heard that before, that would have been disclosure. We're done." But I think people are used to now this conversation evolving and it's becoming more and more accepted. So I think people are expecting more and more, right? It's kind of like, it's almost like that dopamine hit. I want to see another video. I want to see another report. Well, at the end of the day, it's really not about more videos. It's not about more reports. I know that satisfies the idle curiosity of a lot of people, but at the end of the day, that's not what takes this topic and pushes it over the line. It's getting people that were involved in the legacy program to become completely forthcoming and transparent with Congress, which therefore they can then translate to the American people and provide that information the way it's supposed to work, right? So that's kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I'm working with organizations like the UAPDF, UAP. Um, it's basically a disclosure fund to help pay for people's travel so they can go to and from, whistleblowers can talk to Congress. And I'm also working quite well with Ryan Graves' organization. I'm not really integrally involved in it, but I'm a huge supporter of what he's doing with the Americans for Safe Aerospace. He's like you. He's a former fighter pilot and decided, take the talk conversation to the streets and do something about it and be an activist. I applaud him for that. He's in the same category as Dave Fravor and Alex Dietrich and Chad Underwood and the other two individuals, which I'm not sure if they're comfortable with me saying their names, so I won't. But there's countless people like that, patriots that want to do the right thing and are actually making a difference. And by the way, don't look now, but you're part of that category yourself. You've gotten your fair share you've been beaten up a lot for expressing your views on this topic, just like I have. And yet here you are, right? You're still doing it. So, when you stop doing it, that's when they win. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what we're doing, Capitol Hill. That's really our primary motivation. Getting into a classified environment allows us to speak a little bit more freely, obviously. There's still some considerations, because just because you have security clearance doesn't mean you have the right read-ons, doesn't mean you have the need to know, doesn't mean you have all these other things. And you have to go back to the original classification authority, the OCA, and say, hey, can these people be briefed into it? Half the time they say no, they can't. So it's just kind of this tug of war, bureaucratic tug of war and give and take. And so finally you settle on, okay, you can say this, but you can't say that. And that's kind of where they draw the lines. And then once you say that, or you say this, then over time you can start pushing those boundaries, right? Well, they already know this, so can we talk about maybe this other category? And that takes, a lot of discussions. And I think Dave Bruce is going to be very helpful in this. He has a lot of institutional knowledge. The way he was treated after he became public was terrible. Um, Same way they treated me, and it was unfair and unjust. So I'm glad to see David finally in a position that he deserves and he earned. I think he is going to be a great credit and service to the American people. But with that said, we still have rules we have to play by. Just because Dave Grush is there, or just because I'm up in a skiff, doesn't mean that everything is going to be said all at once. It doesn't work that way, especially when you're in a room with other elements of the U.S. government as well. I'm not going to say who they might be. That you have to consider what their equities are. There's no way around it. You have to. And so that's kind of the process.
Well, I'd like to say thank you so much for all that you've done, Lou. I know, at least speaking for myself and many people in my audience, we really appreciate it. And I love that hat too. Thank you for wearing that hat.
Thanks. Yeah, I am unapologetically patriotic. I can't help it, man. I am who I am. You're not going to see me in a Valentino suit or Versace suit. I'm more of a jeans and a Fruit of the Loom t-shirt kind of guy. Can I wear a suit? Yeah, but this is who I am. And I appreciate what you're doing, and I really appreciate your audience. You've got a great audience. I would encourage you to continue to pursue this topic and talk to some of the other people that are doing incredible work in this arena. I cannot and will not take the credit for things that other people have been responsible for. People like Chris Mellon. There's some attorneys that are working very hard behind the scenes to try to untangle some of the more complex national security legal issues. You've got some wonderful, wonderful human beings. And then you've got some very brave people in Congress right now that are willing to put their political careers on the line for this topic. So people like Luna and Burchett and Burleson, And on the Senate side, of course, Marco Rubio and Senator Rounds and even Schumer and folks like that. This is a bipartisan issue, and it really is. And we're even seeing that even on the House side. Um, Again, I'm not going to kiss and tell specifically, who I'm referring to, but there's a lot of synergy and support to have greater transparency into this topic. And I think there might even be a willingness now in certain elements of our government to maybe start sharing some of what they know and what they knew in the past. And I'm very encouraged by that. I think that's great. I think the home team is winning here, and I expect a lot more in the way of revelations in the near term.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lou. Thanks for your time, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for your great audience and appreciate it. And big hats off to your staff there. They were wonderful to meet in person. I was very surprised that they showed up, but it was very nice. And so please pass on my regards as well to them.
Without a doubt. All right. Thank you. Okay, were you guys surprised by Lou's greatest threat to humanity, that it is corruption? I wasn't actually, although it was a little at the time, but thinking back on it, and I said I was disappointed as a parent, but I think it's the reverse. I'm actually a disappointed kid in the organization that created me. It basically was created by America, went through 24 years of intense military training, and I believed it, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. And I just feel like it hasn't been reciprocated. And I would love to see some actual integrity first from our government and these institutions. So thanks for all your support. Please go to patreon.com/Chris Lehto, like these amazing people, and share the channel. Go to our sister channel, UAP Society, and have a great rest of your day. Peace.